I'm super pleased to be here. I've just started working alongside of CITRIS and CIPA as a visiting scholar. I've been running Women in Robotics and Silicon Valley Robotics for a while now. Oh, by the way, I'm Andra Kay. I'm the Managing Director of Silicon Valley Robotics and the founder of Women in Robotics. And this has given me a chance to work with CIPA, with CITRIS, and with WITI to bring together the academic side with the industry side of robotics, which I think is just a fundamental part of growing our robotics ecosystem. And as I said, today is Ada Lovelace Day, and there's a celebration on the second Tuesday of October every year to commemorate Ada Lovelace. Little trivia, it's neither her birthday nor her death day because they're awkwardly positioned and we shouldn't celebrate that anyway. It's just a good day to talk about women in tech. And if you haven't heard of Ada Lovelace, the Countess of Numbers, she was a very gifted mathematician who lived in the early 1800s. She was the colleague of Charles Babbage, who is credited with inventing the computer. Although Babbage predicted the usefulness of a programmable computer or calculating machine, really, that's what he predicted a computer was for, calculating numbers. It was actually Ada who wrote the first actual computer program. It was never used because Babbage never finished the first computer. And it was Ada who foresaw that once you could perform algorithms by machine, you could substitute numbers for symbols of virtually anything. She could imagine the future power of computers. Sadly, she died very young, at 36, and her only published work consisted of endnotes on somebody else's book. And that's where the first computer program was written. Now, her notes were actually 4 times longer than the actual book. But nonetheless, it just wasn't done for a woman to be a professional. Computers was a sort of odd hobby for the Countess, like playing cards or shopping for hats. And at least she had enough money to indulge in her hobby, but she wasn't treated as a professional. I publish the Women in Robotics You Need to Know About list every year as a way of amplifying women who work professionally in robotics. There are many wonderful women working in robotics out there, but according to research, it's less than 15% at best of the robotics profession. In my experience, it's more like less than 10%. And yet, in our working lives, we see far more than 90% male representation on manels or male panels, as speakers, as CEOs, as investors, as decision makers, as scientists. We don't want token representation. We want representation that equals the natural population. And we need natural representation in robotics to avoid the terrifying labour and skills shortage that the world is facing. Firstly, without robots to address the upcoming labour shortages, and secondly, without roboticists to build those robots. So we need women, and we need everyone to support Women in Robotics. Thank you. And now I'd like to hand over to Jill Finlayson, Director of WITI.
Hello and welcome. I'm very excited to have you join us today. This type of event and this type of community building, I think, is one of the key ways that we bring more women into technology and we stay in technology together. I have been the Director of Women in Tech since just January, but the initiative has been around for a few years. And what we really try to do is a very lofty goal, right? We want to increase the participation, the persistence, and the advancement of women in tech fields. That's a big ask, right? That's not a small or trivial task. And what we want to do is do this in partnership to do it at scale. So when we talk about Women in Tech Initiative, we have 3 main pathways that we're looking at on how do we make a difference, how do we make change. One is to come in from the research side. What data do we have? What do we understand? What are the percentages of people participating? Why are they leaving? Where are they going when they leave? How do we make it easier to stay? And so with that data, we can make a lot of differences. So can I talk about this podium for a second? Right? This is a case in point of something that was designed for men that's very large, often too tall, and it forces women to accommodate themselves to the technology rather than having the technology accommodate them. I was recently at the Grace Hopper conference last week, and women had to stand in front of the podiums where they didn't have access to their notes, right? Putting them at a disadvantage. They had to walk back and forth. So when we think about these type of data gaps, what we don't even know, if you haven't had a chance to read 2 books I've read recently, one's been out for a little while, one's new, is Weapons of Math Destruction and Invisible Women. And Invisible Women goes into a deep look at the gender data gap where women aren't even counted, right? They're not even looked at. The data's not even there to look at. So when we talk about robotics and when we talk about designing for the future and the future of work, if women aren't involved in the early stages, we're going to really pay an immense price down the road. And it's an exponential price that we will pay. So that's why I'm so excited that you're here. So research, data, best practices, and then events. We want to show you that there are people who look like you doing these things in the real world, having, success in these careers and making a big difference, because a lot of times when women design for the future, they design for impact, they design for social good. So not only are we getting more women engineering, but we're solving bigger problems. So events like this, we're going to have another event. We do an annual symposium. It's going to be March 6th. And this year, last year was on artificial intelligence. This year's on cybersecurity. And, that may sound maybe like something cryptology or out there, but it turns out, cybersecurity, the more you know, the more personal it is. There's individual cybersecurity concerns about your identity theft and your images in the cloud and financial, issues, but there's also large-scale issues around how do we deal with defense? How do we get people freed if they're being held by a terrorist? These are cybersecurity issues. But there's also our water system, our electrical grid. There's cities being held for ransomware. So this is a huge and growing area. So like robotics, you need to think about where we're going to be, not where we are today. So that's the opportunity to think about these events and to think about how can we work with the corporate sector, how do we work with startups, and how do we ensure that women have an equal opportunity for success in both. And then the third path is students. So how many of you are students in the audience? There we go. So how do we help you connect with the experts in the field, the startup founders? How do we help you network with the support network that you're going to need to be successful? So we look at how do we create pathways into tech. We look at how do we support the networking opportunities. So these are the opportunities that you have. So I'm very excited that you're here today. That's what WITty's doing. Come support our efforts. And with that, I'd like to introduce the co-founder of WITty, Camille Crittenden.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Andrea, and really hats off to you and the planning team for providing such a wonderful program that is in store for us this afternoon. I'm really delighted to be here. As Jill mentioned, my name is Camille Crittenden. I'm Executive Director of CITRIS in the Bonato Institute and also co-founder of the Women in Tech Initiative together with College of Engineering Dean Tsu-Jae King Liu. So we are thrilled to be able to present some of the real shining stars of women in technology here at Berkeley and from around the Bay Area, not only in academia, but also from the startup field, from corporations and industries as well. It's going to take all of us to be able to highlight and lift up the women who are doing such great work and to be able to help them persist and succeed in the field, as Jill was talking about.